Now, maybe some of you, when you heard me begin that text, started to carry on with that amazing mythic tale of creation, trying to remember the details of this wondrous creation. What did God say and do on days 2 and 3 and 4, and so on? And if you did, then maybe you have reached the conundrum of the biblical ages, the one that makes us stop in our tracks and look back and go, hold on a minute. Because it was on day 4 that God creates the sun and the moon and the stars. So if our little gas ball sun and our tiny nightlight moon aren't made until day 4, then what is this light that's created with God's first breath? Creation's first light. Thank you, Norman. He has a question mark on his face. Now, I am itching to share with you some of the wondrous mystical tales that have offered possible answers to this conundrum from the rabbis. And I will in a moment. But I will acknowledge right now in this space, imagining where some of you sit, that we are not ancient Israelites. We are thoroughly steeped in enlightenment and scientific thinking. And contrary to the assumption of some that one cannot be a person of faith and of science, let me begin with this. Because we live in the 21st century, we know that there have been scientific discoveries since at least Galileo that may at first seem to have taken the shine off this particular mystery. We know that this universe, ours at least, is about 13.8 billion years old, and that we're still seeing the light fallout from creation's first light that we call, rather clunkily, the Big Bang. So there we are. That's it. Gap plugged. But get this, and thank you to Vincent Randy for sending this to me. Sometime back in the fall, astronomers and astrophysicists reported a remarkably biblical question. This super-duper, very clever telescope that's aboard the New Horizons deep spacecraft has sent images back to Earth of, you guessed it, light, whose source cannot be explained, at least not by our current knowledge. I'm quoting, "The universe isn't completely dark after all, and we don't know what this dim light is, nor where it comes from." I just love this. Scientists now are all agog, coming up with all sorts of narratives and possibilities, some simple, some graphically adventurous, to identify and quantify this creation's first light. And they sound, to my ear at least, remarkably midrashic, imaginative suppositions that delve into what are ultimately inexplicable mysteries. This is the one I loved. It could be clouds of exotic subatomic particles that decay radioactively or collide and annihilate themselves in flashes of energy that add to the universal glow. That scientist can spin adjectives amazingly well. To my ear, this is just one more way for us humans to push our minds and our souls into the realm of deep mystery and to lift ourselves for a moment, an instant, above the mundanity and the dark lassitude of our current days into this soul's adventure, where the epiphanies are enough to make us laugh and cry and even hope again in God's dream for our world. So alongside those scientists of today, let me share my discoveries as I had a wonderful time reading the wonderful spiritual, mystical, hopeful tales that ancient and modern darshanim, that's the word for people who do midrash, what they have offered to mind this biblical gap quench creation's first light. Now, what ancient midrash suggests that creation's first light danced in the Garden of Eden, making the night as colorful as the day? Another said that unlike sun's light, creation's first light is bright, but it does no harm. It doesn't burn skin, it doesn't dry up rivers. There's another longer midrash that's spun by successive storytellers over centuries to fill this gap. And it goes on to suggest that when Adam and Eve doubted God's providence and questioned God's wisdom, she hid the light from them, vowing to share creation's first light only with those who were righteous or open to wisdom. But God's love got the better of God, longing to share this light. As Adam and Eve left the garden, God hid the light in a jewel sewn into the garments that Adam and Eve made from the fig leaves. In each generation that followed them, someone would capture a glimpse of this first light. They would treasure it and they would pass it on. And so it was that it found its way into Noah's Ark. In creation's darkest hour, it kept hope and life alight and afloat, until creation's first light danced to the sky as a rainbow, signaling the rebirth of the earth. Another midrash tells of Abraham seeing creation's first light dancing between the stars of the night sky when God blessed him and Sarah with their vocation to be a people of blessing for the world. It was creation's first light that lit the way for Hagar, keeping her and her son Esau safe as she escaped oppression into the desert, finding her the water that kept them alive. Creation's first light carved the path, the dry path, through the Reed Sea for Moses and God's people. Creation's first light was what drew Samuel from his bed to listen for holy wisdom in an empty temple. Creation's first light kept vigil with Jonah in the belly of his whale until he was ready to share God's promise of forgiveness for Nineveh. Creation's first light kept the lights burning for 8 days in the Maccabean revolt. And so this midrash goes on, and then we get these words. In the beginning was the Word, and that Word was light, and the light has come into the world, and nothing can put it out. The Gospel of John's most quintessential Christian midrash on this opening verse of creation. What is this light that comes into the world? And it hasn't ended there. Thanks to these minders of the biblical gap, ancient and modern, scientific and mystical, we've been given the template for ourselves to go searching for glimpses of God's first light. We'll find it wherever wisdom is found, wherever hope is restored, wherever we see courage or love in the face of hatred, wherever we see those people who hold light in times of darkness. There's a contemporary rabbi by name Sandy Sasso, and she tells it this way in a beautiful children's story. She says, on the first day of creation, God said, "Let there be light," and with this light, God created whole new worlds. She goes on and says, and there are places where you will find this light. In a hug, peeking from a smile, in a room filled with questions, in a meadow filled with memories. You'll see it glinting in a mother's eyes before her child is even born. And you will see creation's first light in the first glance of that newborn baby, where it shines as brightly as it did on creation's first day. What I'm inviting us all to do is to take this story and own it enough to say, where is it that we see creation's first light? And I won't ask you to do things I'm not prepared to do myself. So let me end with my midrash on this text, these tales of creation's first light, as an encouragement for you to do the same. Now see if I can do this without tearing up. The day my daughter was taken into hospital to deliver her 3 preemie babies, I was called in to be gown to their older sibling, Noah, to hold the fort for however and whatever was about to happen. This is my baby who was having babies. You can imagine I was anxious, fearful even. It was too soon. They would be so tiny. What was about to happen to her, to my family, to her family? I knew I couldn't do it. Would we manage? So I drove along the lake shore, and I saw this in my rear view mirror. So I stopped, and I parked, and I walked out, and I stood, and I prayed. The words that came were these: there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. Now I know this is a sunset, but for me now and always it will be a mirror of creation's first light. The light before the birth. The light before the birth. God's sign that no matter what, God's sigh and breath hovers over all chaos and all darkness, all fear and all ugliness, calling forth a new world. If creation's first light tells us anything, it tells us all will be well. So look for the light. Amen.